have to look far around us and see, that indeed things are in a sad state of disrepair. Why are we attending to our highway systems, for instance, now? But this is, trivial, and it's not, as far as just information goes. And he goes on and on and on and on, page after page after page of this. And in fact, now he gets down to the nitty-gritty on page 6, line 3, item 17. The authority to create money is a sovereign power vested in the Congress under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which is just as I said. So you don't have to restore that right. You have to exercise it. And if you're going to exercise it, how are you going to exercise it? By the only principles which can possibly serve us, So he goes on, point 18, the line 6, the enactment of the Federal Reserve Act in 1913 by Congress effectively delegated the sovereign power to create money to the Federal Reserve System and private financial industry. Well, indeed it did. We all know that. I mean, this is just stupid. It's like, duh. But the thing is, it's not just that it effectively, as it says, delegated the sovereign power to create money to the Federal Reserve System and private financial industry. The problem is, where does that, quote, sovereign power, unquote, rightly belong? In truth, we the people are always, always, always the issuers of our currency. It's this obfuscation of our currency which is the problem. The federal government can't take that over, and that would make it better. You have to rectify the obfuscation of its crimes against us, and its crimes are that the banking system pretends to be a creditor, that in fact it only publishes evidence of our promissory obligations to each other. It thus launders the principal into its unrightful possession, whereas paid principal, in fact, is the property of no one. It's only rightly retired from circulation. And then, by imposing interest on this unlawful and unjustified, artificial, falsified debt to the banking system, they multiply the artificial, falsified debt into terminal indebtedness and dispossession. Unless we rectify that, and it's already rectified in mathematically perfected economy. So who would be writing a contrary bill of any kind, purporting, nonetheless, to solve the same objects, but not even showing how? And as we will see in the end of this bill, in fact, leaving leeway to complete undermining of its purposes. Complete. This ceding of the constitutional power has contributed materially, it goes on to say, to a multitude of monetary and financial afflictions, including growing and unreasonable concentration of wealth, unbridled expansion of national debt, both public and private. Well, these are two very stupid things. Growing and unreasonable concentration of wealth. Well, that's just so trivial, because all you're doing is concentrating the wealth in the possession of people who produce, or entities which produce, nothing. And so this is a consequence of this obfuscation of the currency. Unless you're plagiarizing me in identifying and solving that, you're not going to solve anything. He goes on to say, unbridled expansion of national debt, both public and private. That's a preposterous misunderstanding of the very term national debt. National debt refers to the public debt of the federal government, which of course is a debt which is owed by the people together collectively on a federal level. You see, so there isn't a such thing as a national debt that's private. That's private debt. There's private debt and national debt. So this is just a stupid misuse of terms, which leads you to believe, of course, that whoever's spewing this garbage out in this sloppy manner, of course, hasn't done any more exacting work in resolving solution. Point C goes on of item 19, excessive reliance on taxation of citizens for raising public revenues. Well, that's a lie. You know, there's no excessive reliance on taxation because, in truth, anything that's funded has to be paid for, and the principal has to be retired from circulation if we're to solve inflation and deflation. And if we do not solve inflation and deflation, we do not maintain the integrity of our promissory obligations. Because unless we maintain this perpetual one-to-one-to-one relationship, which mathematically perfected economy and mathematically perfected economy alone maintains, this relationship being between remaining circulation, remaining value of represented property, and remaining obligation to pay just that for the remaining value of the represented property, we do not maintain the integrity of the promissory obligations, which means that the purported value or costliness of money or property go up or down, a thing which we definitely must avoid, because on one side or the other of every case is someone who's offended, and on the other side is someone who profited unduly. It's a corruption of the very principles of just reward for production, which is incumbent and central to the very idea of true free enterprise. We want to avoid corrupting or violating that principle. So we absolutely must maintain this perpetual one-to-one-to-one relationship which mathematically perfected economy and mathematically perfected economy alone accomplishes. So we can't do that. So then he goes on, excessive reliance on taxation. That's not the matter. Taxation, you have to pay for it, and the person who should pay for it is the person who consumes of it. Just as it is in our private affairs, so it must be in our public affairs. The problem then is not that it's excessive reliance on taxation, because taxation must be relied on to pay for the things. The problem is that the cost of all this is multiplied. It isn't an excessive reliance on taxation. It's the same underlying obfuscation of the currency, which multiplies public costs likewise. Because, for instance, how is the Federal Reserve pouring money into circulation? Well, it's buying federal securities, bonds. So what does this mean? It's actually issuing promissory obligations of the people to pay for its mere publication of evidence of our debt, and it's enriching in itself all the principal and dividends or interest which is paid, on this principal which is laundered into its possession unrightfully. It's wrong. The federal government can indeed create that money, but it's not really truly just the federal government, because the concept of federal government is the public deciding jointly that, oh yes, let's fund this, let's go ahead and do this project, and those who consume it will pay for it. All right? So a public project is done just the way it needs to be done in private enterprise, and it's paid for likewise by the people who consume of it, unless we decide for further reasons that it should be otherwise. But that's the first principle to abide by. So the the issue then isn't that there's we need this money from a purported banking system which merely publishes evidence of our public debt. No, I mean that's preposterous. The issue is that this obfuscation of the currency, the fact that we should be issuing our own promissory obligations, and in fact we are the true issuers, that the banking system is not a creditor at all. It never gives up any property but the negligible cost of merely publishing the evidence of our debts on its paper. It never gives up any property at all. But it certainly doesn't give it up any property commensurable to the ostensible debt, which is in turn merely assumed wrongly to be owed to the banking system. There is no debt to the banking system, you see. And if the banks have the power or authority to do this in a republic, under which, of course, no private citizen has any right or authority that cannot be granted to any other private citizen, then, of course, we have the equal authority to both presume to repay our debts by likewise issuing irredeemable promissory obligations to the banking system. The banking system has no claim to a debt whatsoever. They're merely publishers of the evidence of our promissory obligations to each other. So these are the issues that should be addressed in this bill, and they're utterly absent. Why? Because Stephen Zarlinga, instead of actually advocating solution, he would get behind mathematically perfected economy. He's trying to be an author of something which only purports to be a solution by talking about the same things, but providing no resolution of these issues at all here, much less a qualification of resolution. He's just citing things that are wrong here. So he goes on, banks pyramided their value by spending money into existence, greatly inflating. And it's the very thing that he's advocating, spending money into existence. He's criticizing it on the one hand here, but he's advocating it in his proposition of this bill. How can this be? They're mutually exclusive ends. You can't have it both ways. You see, it has to be one way or the other at most. And if neither are correct, then you can't do either and be doing anything rightly. And as I've said, you can't spend money into circulation and solve inflation and deflation. It's mutually exclusive to solution. So they're merely pretending that such a thing exists when, in fact, no such thing exists if you're solving inflation. And you must solve inflation if you're going to maintain the integrity of the circulation. The preposterous architecture or design of this bill is evident and just on just so many levels and in so many places. He says here on page 10, line 21, for instance, that a purpose of this is to abolish the creation of money or purchasing power by private persons through lending against deposits by means of fractional reserve banking or by any other means. Well, you tell me, would that not then abolish the right of the individual to issue their own promissory obligation free of exploitation? I mean, the very object of monetization and the only suitable vehicle being a promissory obligation, we can't outlaw that. We can't abolish it, you see. So this is just preposterous. Very next point on the next page, line 1 of page 11, he goes on to say another purpose is to enable the federal government to invest or lend new money into circulation. Wait a minute. Were they not going to be spending money into circulation? What are they doing now? Lending new money